I knew the moment I read the text that something inside me was about to break, but what I didn't expect was how quiet the breaking would feel. My phone lit up on the kitchen counter, and when I turned it over, the words sliced through me like a cold blade. "You're not invited to the wedding. It's a classy event." My sister didn't bother dressing it up, softening it, explaining it. Just a declaration, a dismissal. And right below it, like a final twist of the knife, was my mother's reply. A single thumbs-up emoji. An okay sign to cutting me out of the biggest event I had spent months funding. I stared at the screen until my vision blurred. Not because I was surprised. They'd been inching toward this cruelty for years, but because of how easy it was for them. How public. How proud. My hand didn't even shake when I typed back. Understood. I'll cancel the classy payments too. For the first time in 8 years, I didn't swallow my hurt. I didn't apologize. I didn't offer to fix things. I just hit send and waited for the world to tilt. The silence lasted exactly 12 seconds before my phone exploded in vibrations. First Hannah, then Mom, then Hannah again. "You're being dramatic. Stop overreacting. You wouldn't dare. Don't ruin this for your sister." Their voices blurred together into one long, familiar song. The same chorus I'd been conditioned to hear since I was old enough to understand the unequal weight of their expectations. I walked away from the phone and poured myself a glass of water I didn't really want. Anything to keep my hands busy while messages kept rolling in, each more entitled, more demanding, more sure I'd fall in line. I took a breath and did something I had never done in my life. I turned the phone face down and let them scream into the void. For a moment, the apartment felt strangely quiet, as though even the walls were holding their breath. The morning sun fell across the tiny living room I'd worked so hard to afford, my quiet place, my safe place, the one space no one else had paid for. Hannah always joked it looked too simple, that it wasn't elegant enough for someone making good money in tech. But I liked my small, uncluttered world. I liked that I didn't owe it to anyone. I sat at the table trying to steady my thoughts, but memories kept flooding in before I could push them away. 8 years of holidays where I paid the bill. 8 years of emergency calls from Mom. Rent shortfalls, medical co-pays, car repairs. 8 years of Hannah's tuition, Hannah's rent, Hannah's entire wardrobe for her marketing job she never kept for long. And now the wedding, the venue deposit, the florist, the designer dress, the photographer whose rates made me dizzy but whom Hannah insisted on because Evan's family expects something sophisticated. I had been handing over my savings while they erased me from the picture. A sharp ping again. Another message. I flipped the phone over and saw a barrage of notifications from Instagram. One of Hannah's bridesmaids had posted a reel from a bridal fitting. Glittering dresses, champagne flutes, loud laughter. And in the comments, someone asked, "Will your sister be walking you down the aisle?" Hannah's reply froze the breath in my lungs. God, no. She wouldn't fit the vibe. She's not classy. Not classy. I clicked the comment thread. It got worse. She'd just embarrass us. She's sweet, just not our type of crowd. She doesn't get social things. I sat back, pulse thundering in my ears. There it was. The truth they'd been trying to hide behind polite excuses and half smiles. They weren't excluding me because space was limited, or because they misunderstood my schedule, or because weddings are complicated. They were excluding me because they were ashamed of me. Because in their eyes, I wasn't the right kind of sister, not pretty enough, not polished enough, not wealthy-looking enough, even though I was the one funding the entire event. I covered my face with both hands, but the tears didn't come. What washed over me wasn't sorrow, it was clarity, painful, burning clarity. This wasn't new. It was the same story told with different words. I remembered being 10 and handing Hannah my only birthday cupcake because Mom said, "She needs it more than you." I remembered staying up until 2 in the morning, tutoring Hannah through her senior year English class, while Mom praised her for working so hard and barely looked at me. I remembered sitting alone at my college graduation because Mom couldn't get time off. only to find photos on Facebook of her having brunch with Hannah the same day. And I remembered every time I was told I was too sensitive, overthinking, imagining things. But the comments online were real. The text was real. Their laughter was real. I picked up my phone and scrolled through the latest messages. Hannah's panic was rising. "You're going to ruin everything. Mom says you're being childish. You know you don't fit in with Evan's family. Stop making this about you." I whispered to the empty room, "I never made any of this about me." The phone buzzed again, a call this time. "Mom." I let it ring out. Another call. I rejected it. When the third one came, I answered because I knew she wouldn't stop. Her voice hit me like cold water. "Lena, what is the meaning of this? Hannah is beside herself." "She told me I'm not invited," I said calmly. "So, I'm respecting her wishes." Mom scoffed. "You know how she gets when she's stressed. She didn't mean it." I almost laughed. "She put it in writing." Mom didn't miss a beat. "Well, she regrets it now, and you, of all people, should rise above petty insults." "Petty?" I repeated. "You agreed with her." "It was just an emoji," Mom snapped. "Goodness, you're dramatic. This wedding is important for our family's standing. Don't throw away years of work for a moment of hurt feelings." There it was again. The quiet confession of where I ranked. Family standing above my dignity. Hannah's future above my presence. Their image above my worth. I stared at the blank wall while Mom kept rambling, defending Hannah, lecturing me, reshaping the narrative so I came out selfish no matter what I did. But I wasn't 10 anymore. And this time, the guilt slid off me like water. "Mom," I said finally, "I've been paying for a wedding I'm not allowed to attend." The line went silent. Then she exhaled sharply. "Why does everything have to be about money with you? Hannah needs you. Family helps family." I closed my eyes. Family should respect family too. She didn't answer. I hung up first. My hands trembled, not with fear but with the strange electricity of making a choice I couldn't undo. I stood, walked to the window, and looked out at the city I'd built a life in by myself. A life they never congratulated me for. A life they happily drained dry. They thought I would bend. They thought I would apologize. They thought I would clean up whatever mess Hannah made because that was the role they gave me. The fixer, the wallet, the background character. But I had just stepped off that stage. And tomorrow, whether they were ready for it or not, the consequences of their choices would begin landing like falling dominoes. I woke the next morning to the sound of my phone vibrating across the nightstand, sharp, insistent, impossible to ignore. For a moment, I didn't remember what had happened the night before. Then the memory hit like a bruise pressed too hard. Hannah's text, Mom's emoji, my own response that felt like the first deep breath I'd taken in years. I reached for the phone, not out of hope, but out of resignation. I knew exactly what I'd find. 37 messages. Most from Hannah, 12 from Mom, and a few from numbers I didn't recognize. Likely bridesmaids who suddenly felt entitled to demand that I fall back in line. I didn't open a single one. I placed the phone face down again, letting the chain reaction unfold without me. Outside, the morning light filtered through the curtains, thin and quiet. A strange calm settled over me, the kind you feel when a storm has already destroyed everything it could touch. I got dressed, grabbed my bag, and drove to work like it was any other day, though the tension in my chest pulsed with every turn of the wheel. By the time I pulled into the parking garage, my phone had racked up another 17 messages. I turned it off completely, let the world burn. I had work to do. Inside the office, everything was as it always was. Coffee brewing, keyboards clicking, my team laughing about something in the break room. For a moment, I let the normalcy soothe me. No one here cared about the wedding. No one viewed me as a bank account. No one measured my worth against social status or appearances. I was just Lena, senior data analyst, reliable and competent. But by midday, even the refuge of fluorescent lights and spreadsheets couldn't protect me. The receptionist buzzed my desk. "Lena, your mother is on the line. She's called 3 times. Should I tell her you're unavailable?" I swallowed hard. "I'll take it." The voice that burst through the phone was sharp enough to grate metal. "Lena, this is unacceptable. What do you think you're doing ignoring us like this?" "I'm working," I replied, "and there's nothing else to talk about." "Nothing to—" Mom cut herself off with an exasperated breath. "The venue needs payment by Friday. Hannah is falling apart. You cannot just walk away because your feelings are hurt." "It wasn't my feelings that were hurt," I said evenly. "It was my dignity." "Oh, don't start with that." Mom's tone was dismissive. "You've always been too sensitive." "Hannah didn't mean anything by it." "She meant every word," I said. "She said I wasn't classy enough. She told the internet I would embarrass her. She uninvited me from an event I'm paying for." Mom scoffed. "You're blowing this out of proportion. You know how Hannah is. She says things when she's stressed. It doesn't mean she doesn't love you." I laughed softly, without humor. "Love doesn't look like humiliation." Mom ignored that completely. "Family sacrifices for family. You're established. Hannah is just starting out. You should want to invest in her future." "I have," I said sharply, "for 8 years. College, rent, bills, clothes, emergencies, and now her wedding." "Well," Mom snapped, "that's what older siblings do." "That's what you taught me older siblings do," I corrected. "There's a difference." Her silence wasn't agreement, it was calculation. Finally, she said, "So what? You're really going to let the wedding fall apart because of one little comment?" "It wasn't one comment," I said. "It was a lifetime." Mom sighed dramatically. "You're making a scene, and you're making this about you." "I'm making it about fairness." "Oh, please," she scoffed. "If you cared about fairness, you wouldn't be punishing your sister like this." "I'm not punishing anyone," I said calmly. "I'm just done paying for an event I'm not allowed to attend." Her tone shifted, icy, cutting. "You will ruin this entire family with your selfishness." I closed my eyes. "Then maybe the family shouldn't rest on my bank account," she gasped, furious. "You listen to me." But I hung up. I didn't slam the phone down, didn't curse, didn't cry. I simply ended the call. And for the first time, I didn't feel guilty. The rest of the day passed in a fog. I completed reports, attended meetings, nodded along at conversations I barely absorbed. My mind kept replaying Mom's words. Selfish, dramatic, ruinous. Words she'd thrown like darts at me all my life. Words I used to believe. Words that now felt flimsy and transparent. When work ended, I drove home in silence. No music, no podcasts. Just the hum of the wheels on the road and the faint beat of my heart shifting into a rhythm I didn't yet understand. As soon as I walked into my apartment, the quiet felt heavier. I dropped my bag on the couch and sat at the dining table, staring at nothing. Then, before I could stop myself, I reached for my phone and turned it back on. The messages flooded in instantly. From Hannah, "Please tell me you're not serious. Mom says you're being impossible. Do not ruin my wedding. You're making everything worse. You always ruin things. Why are you doing this to me?" Then from Mom, "Call me back immediately. This isn't negotiable. Fix this. You will regret this behavior." My hands didn't shake this time. I scrolled through each message like they belonged to strangers. When the phone rang again, I answered out of sheer exhaustion. Hannah's voice came through fast and frantic. "Lena, this is insane. You can't do this. The venue needs the second payment by Friday. Mom said you're being vindictive." "I'm not being vindictive," I said. "I'm respecting your wish. You don't want me there, so you don't need my money." Her inhale was sharp. "You're doing this on purpose, to hurt me." "You hurt me first." "Oh my God." Hannah groaned dramatically. "You're really going to play the victim?" "I'm not playing anything," I said. "I'm finally seeing things clearly." She scoffed. "You don't understand how weddings work, Lena. Evan's parents are old money. They expect things. They expect elegance. You showing up wouldn't match that." There it was. the quiet confession of how she truly saw me. "Then you should have planned a wedding you could afford," I said softly. Her silence this time was shock, not anger. "You're unbelievable," she whispered. "No," I said. "I'm done being unbelievable. I'm done being invisible. I'm done being useful only when convenient." Hannah tried again, desperation creeping into her voice. "Lena, if the wedding falls apart, then it falls apart. You'll ruin everything." "No," I said. "You ruined it when you excluded me." There was no screaming, no fight, just a long, empty pause before she hung up. I set the phone down and let the stillness settle over me. Outside, the sky had turned a deep lavender, the first stars peeking through the evening haze. I sat there watching them, feeling the enormity of what I'd done. For the first time in my life, I had chosen myself. And somewhere deep inside, beneath the fear and the ache and the exhaustion, something warm flickered to life. Small, trembling, but alive. The beginning of a boundary, the beginning of a backbone, the beginning of me. I was halfway through reheating leftovers for dinner when my screen lit up with a fresh notification from Instagram. I didn't want to look. Every part of me was tired of being reminded of a wedding I was apparently too ordinary to attend. But curiosity, or maybe old habit, made me tap the alert. There it was, a bright, glittering carousel, posted by one of Hannah's bridesmaids. "Final dress fitting for the Caldwell wedding," the caption read. A swipe to the next picture showed Hannah standing on a pedestal in a lace gown, chin lifted, smiling like the world adored her. In the comments, someone asked, "Will your sister be part of the ceremony?" Hannah replied within seconds, "Lena? Oh, please, she doesn't quite fit the vibe, lol." Fit the vibe. Another comment, "Aren't sisters usually bridesmaids?" Hannah again, "Some people just aren't classy enough for this kind of event." And then the laughing emoji, echoing the exact one Mom had sent in our group chat. The microwave beeped behind me, but I didn't move. My breath felt stuck somewhere in my chest, not painful exactly, more like numbness masquerading as calm. I scrolled further, and the more I read, the worse it became. "She'd make everyone uncomfortable. She's sweet, but not exactly elegant. Can you imagine her trying to talk to Evan's parents?" A tiny tremor ran through my fingers. I set the phone down before I dropped it, pacing to the sink just to have something to hold on to. I wasn't even angry yet, just stunned, like watching people describe a stranger they'd invented, a socially awkward, embarrassing burden, someone they needed to hide to protect their social ladder climb. I never realized mockery could feel so cold. I picked up the phone again, scrolling with the detached fascination of someone watching a slow-motion car crash. A reel auto-played, a livestream clip I hadn't seen before. Hannah and her bridesmaids sipping champagne, laughing as they showed off accessories for the big day. And then Hannah's voice, clear and careless. "If Lena came, she'd show up in flats. She doesn't know how to dress for anything fancy." The room erupted in laughter. I felt something in my stomach twist, tight and hot, but my face stayed dry. No tears. Just a sharp, hollow ache that spread through my chest. I exited the app, needing air, needing silence. But the silence wasn't comforting. It pressed in around me like a truth I'd been ignoring for years. They didn't just forget me. They didn't misunderstand me. They didn't take me for granted. They were ashamed of me. I walked back to the table, trying to steady my breathing. My eyes landed on my laptop, still open from earlier in the day, a document pulled up with email threads from various vendors. Deposits, invoices, receipts, thousands of dollars in my name. I clicked through the tabs, scanning each one. A file from the wedding planner caught my eye. A seating arrangement update. The sender line read, "For Miranda and Hannah," with no CC to me. The planner had intentionally left me out of the correspondence, but kept the billing under my name. I checked older emails. Same thing. Updates about decor, sent to Mom and Hannah. Decisions about catering, sent to Mom and Hannah. Detailed notes on the floral white garden archway, Sent to Mom and Hannah. Not once. Not once in 6 months was I copied on anything that wasn't specifically a bill. I leaned back, exhaling. It wasn't neglect. It wasn't forgetfulness. It was design. An intentional decision to take my resources while minimizing my presence. A dull throb began behind my temples. I stood, almost aimlessly, pacing the apartment until the movement pushed a memory to the surface. Something from a year ago. Hannah in a cafe, stirring her latte with the confidence of someone whose life was always supported by invisible hands. "If I ever get married," she'd said casually, "I want everything to feel elevated, like old money vibes. Can you imagine? A vineyard view ceremony or lakeview estate? That's the dream." I remembered laughing. "You know those places cost as much as a full year's rent, right?" She rolled her eyes. "Not everything is about money, Lena." I should have known then. They'd always been preparing for a future where my role was clear. Fund it, but don't appear in it. My phone buzzed again, snapping me out of the memory. This time it was a text from an old college friend, Nora. "You okay? I heard something weird. Hannah has another group chat? Like, without you, the wedding planning one?" My heart dipped. "Another group chat?" I typed. Nora replied almost instantly. "Yeah, someone sent me a screenshot. They call you the boring sister in it." I swallowed. "Can you send it?" A moment later, the screenshot appeared. Hannah, "Do not tell Lena details. She'll make everything awkward." Bridesmaid, "Agreed, LOL." Mom, "Let's keep her out of the planning. Less stress." Hannah, "She's not the type for classy events anyway." There it was. In writing. Their real voices, without masks or politeness or filters. My chest tightened until it was hard to breathe. I sat down, placing my head in my hands. A decade's worth of rationalizations collapsed under the weight of a few sentences. All the times I assumed they were busy. All the times I believed, "You know your sister didn't mean it." All the times I excused Mom's favoritism as, "You're just more independent." No, it wasn't that. It was never that. The truth sat heavy in my stomach. They valued Hannah, and they used me. I don't know how long I sat there before the knock on my door startled me back to the present. My heart jumped, dread pooling in my gut. I approached quietly, looking through the peephole. "Mom." I should have expected it. I opened the door an inch. "What are you doing here?" Mom pushed her way in without waiting for permission, her perfume hitting me before her words did. "We need to talk." I stepped back. "About what?" "You know what?" she snapped. "Your sister is devastated. The venue called her. They said payment hasn't come through." "That's because I'm not making it." Mom's eyes narrowed. "Stop this nonsense. Hannah is under pressure. This is the biggest opportunity our family has had." "Our family?" I repeated softly. "Or just you and Hannah?" She ignored that. "You know how important the Caldwells are. You know what this marriage could mean." I clenched my jaw. "I know what it's cost me." Mom exhaled sharply like I'd said something offensive. "You're the successful one. You're supposed to support us." "No," I said. "I was supposed to be your daughter, not your income." Her expression flickered, just for a second, with something like surprise, but it hardened instantly. "Are you really going to throw away your sister's future because you want attention?" A bitter laugh escaped me. "Attention? I don't want attention. I want respect." Mom scoffed. "You always twist everything into an attack. You always pretend everything isn't one." We stood there staring at each other across a canyon built over years of unspoken bitterness. She crossed her arms, eyeing me like a misbehaving child. "Think about what you're doing," she said. "This will embarrass us in front of everyone." "I'm embarrassed," I whispered, "that you care more about appearances than your own child." For once, Mom didn't know what to say. She gathered her purse, straightening her posture. "I hope you come to your senses before the weekend." Then she left without looking back. When the door clicked shut, I let out a long breath I didn't know I'd been holding. The apartment fell into silence again, this time warmer, heavier, but honest. I walked to the window, looking out at the streetlights blinking below. I didn't have a plan yet. I didn't know what tomorrow would look like. But one thing was becoming clearer by the hour. If I wanted peace, I'd have to create it myself. If I wanted love, I'd have to stop begging for scraps. If I wanted respect, I'd have to stop funding my own erasure. And for the first time, I felt something new rise inside me. Not anger, not grief, but resolve. A quiet, steady voice that whispered, "Enough." The instant I refreshed Hannah's Instagram page, the truth landed with a heaviness I couldn't blink away. A new post shimmered across my screen. Soft lighting, champagne flutes, satin robes embroidered with bride tribe, and Hannah twirling in front of a mirror while her friends hyped her up. Everything looked expensive, curated, elegant, everything I had paid for. The caption read, "Final dress rehearsal for the Caldwell wedding. Can't wait to celebrate with everyone who matters." Everyone who matters. My throat tightened. I clicked the video attached, a live stream I hadn't watched the night before. Hannah stood in the center of a boutique dressing room, veil draped over her shoulders, bouquet in hand. One of her bridesmaids off camera asked, "What about your sister? Is she helping with any of this?" Hannah laughed, not a light laugh, a dismissive, condescending one. "Lena? Oh no, she'd die in a place like this. Can you imagine her trying to talk to Evan's parents?" The room erupted into amused giggles. "She'd probably show up in flats," another bridesmaid added. Hannah shook her head, smirking. "Exactly, this is a classy event. Not whatever vibe she brings." The comment section below reflected the same cruelty. "She isn't bridesmaid material. Some people just aren't meant for high-end weddings. Good for you for keeping the drama out." Drama. They meant me. I locked my phone, but the silence in the room seemed to echo their voices, overlapping until my chest felt too tight to breathe. I pressed my palms to the table, bowing my head for a moment. I wasn't sure which hurt more, their insults or the realization that none of this was new. They'd been saying things like this for years. Only now, it was public. After a moment, I forced myself to breathe and opened my laptop. I wasn't sure what I was looking for. Answers, proof, something to ground myself. What I found instead was worse. A wedding planner email thread sat open in one of my tabs. The subject line read, "Updated details for the Carter-Caldwell ceremony. Sent to Miranda Carter and Hannah Carter, not me." I scrolled. Notes about decor changes, seating arrangements, timeline adjustments, a revised budget. My revised budget. Then at the very bottom, "Thank you, Lena, for covering the premium upgrade last week." The planner had meant to send that line only to Mom and Hannah. The email was forwarded to me by mistake. My stomach churned. Even the planner understood my role, payer, not participant. I clicked through older emails. It repeated again and again, plans and decisions shared between Mom and Hannah, invoices sent to me. My phone buzzed. "Nora, hey, I don't want to stir anything, but did you know there's another family group chat, the one they used to plan the wedding, without you?" My fingers froze. "No, why?" Nora sent a screenshot. Not from gossip, not twisted, just raw, unfiltered cruelty. "Mom, Lena doesn't need to be involved, it'll complicate things." Hannah, "Agreed, she'll make everything awkward, she doesn't fit the aesthetic." Bridesmaid, "Best to keep her out of the planning, Lowell." Mom again, "Less stress overall." I stared at the screen until the words blurred. I knew my mother preferred Hannah. I knew she saw me as the responsible one, the steady worker bee meant to support the hive but never shine. But seeing it written out, calculated exclusion, cut deeper than anything they'd said to my face. I closed the laptop and let myself sink into the couch. My mind wandered, uninvited, to the last time I remembered Hannah speaking about me with pride. I was 12, she was 8, and she'd told her friend on the playground, "My sister is the smartest person ever." She'd said it with wide-eyed admiration. That little girl was gone, replaced by someone who measured love by social standing and deemed me unworthy. My phone buzzed again, this time a call. Mom. I didn't pick up. Not yet. Instead, I stood and walked to the kitchen sink, splashing cold water on my face. My reflection in the window looked tired, but there was something new there too, something harder, something done. When my phone finally fell silent, I returned to the table. A new email had come through from the wedding planner. My pulse thudded as I opened it. Hi, Miranda. Hi, Hannah. Just confirming the premium package Lena paid for has been successfully logged. I almost laughed. Not classy enough to attend, but classy enough to fund the entire production. I sat back, staring at the email. Everything inside me pulled taut, then snapped into focus. I wasn't dramatic. I wasn't overreacting. I wasn't imagining patterns that didn't exist. They never wanted me included. They only wanted my money. And now, they didn't even have the decency to hide it. A knock jolted me from my thoughts. I wasn't expecting company. My heart skipped. Then I looked through the peephole. Mom. Of course. I opened the door just enough for her to slip inside. She pushed past me without waiting, like she always did, her coat still in hand, perfume trailing behind her. We need to talk, she announced, as if I hadn't spent the last 24 hours drowning in the words she and Hannah had thrown my way. I crossed my arms. About what? Mom spun to face me, eyes sharp, lips tight. Your sister is in tears. She says you're canceling payments the venue called. They said you haven't paid the next installment. Correct, I said. She blinked, stunned by my calm. Lena, don't be ridiculous. Hannah is overwhelmed. You know how she gets. This wedding is important for our family. For your image, I corrected, not for me. You're being unkind, Mom snapped. You're punishing her. No, I said evenly. I'm respecting her wishes. She doesn't want me there. She didn't mean it, Mom protested. She posted it publicly, I reminded her. She mocked me publicly. Mom waved a hand. She was stressed. You can't take everything so personally. I stared at her, a long, steady look. You really don't hear yourself, do you? She froze. I took a step forward. You raised me to carry everything, bills, responsibility, guilt, while she carried nothing, and somehow I'm the one who's selfish? Mom's jaw tightened. Don't twist my words. I don't have to twist them, I said. They're already sharp. She inhaled, annoyed and threatened all at once. You are going to call the venue back, apologize, and fix this. No, I said. Her eyes widened. What did you say? I said no. Silence dropped between us like a stone. You're making a terrible decision, Mom said finally. This will embarrass us. I shook my head. No, what's embarrassing is being used by your own family and pretending it's love. Mom opened her mouth but didn't speak. She stood frozen in the doorway, stunned that her authority, her lifelong control over me, had hit a wall for the first time. I walked to the door and opened it. Good night, Mom. She stared at me, as if waiting for me to blink first. I didn't. After a long moment, she stepped outside, her expression tight with disbelief. As the door closed, the quiet wrapped around me again. But this time, it didn't suffocate. It felt like a beginning. I returned to the laptop, eyes drifting toward the list of vendors. Instead of fear, I felt clarity, resolve, strength I didn't know I had. Tomorrow, I would make the calls they never believed I'd dare to make. And for once, they would learn what it felt like when I didn't save them. I woke the next morning before my alarm, eyes wide open in the dim light. No racing heart, no dread. Just a strange, quiet certainty pulsing through me. The same text from last night sat in my notifications like a bruise I kept pressing. You're not invited to the wedding. It's a classy event. And Mom's emoji seal of approval right under it. I stared at the message one last time before locking my phone and setting it aside. If they didn't want me there, Then they didn't need my money there either. I brewed coffee, letting the bitter smell fill my apartment. My hands still trembled a little, but not from fear. More like adrenaline, the kind that comes right before you finally walk away from a fire you've been standing in for years. I sat at the kitchen table, the list of vendors pulled up on my laptop, my cursor hovering over the first number. For 8 years I had paid without question. Rent, tuition, repairs, emergencies, this wedding, always the responsible one, the sensible one, the one who picked up the slack while Hannah chased whatever dreams Mom inflated for her. But today, I wasn't the family's invisible wallet. Today, I was done. I dialed the number for Lakeview Estate, the most expensive venue within a 100-mile radius, Hannah's dream location, secured with my signature and my account. A soft chime on the other end, then a cheerful voice answered. "Lakeview Estate, this is Christine. How may I assist you?" "This is Lena Carter," I said. "I'm the primary payer on the Caldwell-Carter wedding account. I'd like to cancel all future payments effective immediately." There was a beat of silence. Then, "All future payments?" "That's right," Christine hesitated, choosing her words carefully. "You do understand this may affect the bride's reservation date? There is a waiting list." "I understand," I said. "Go ahead with the cancellation." Her professionalism cracked for a moment. "Of course, we'll notify the bride right away." I ended the call and stared at the blank wall ahead of me. One down. Before I could dial the next number, my phone buzzed violently. "The florist," I answered. "Hello?" "Hi, is this Lena? This is April from Evergreen Florals. I'm calling because we received notice from the venue that you canceled your payment. The bride, Hannah, was just on the phone with us trying to confirm the flower arches, but there's an issue with the account." I took a breath. Yes, that's correct. April exhaled like she had been holding in a laugh. She sounded surprised. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. When the call ended, I moved down my list. Next up, catering. I dialed the number for the caterer, an upscale firm specializing in elevated, curated luxury dining experiences, another one of Hannah's must-haves. After 2 rings, someone answered. "Silver Plate Catering, this is Drew." "This is Lena Carter. I need to cancel the seafood tasting menu and all pending payments for the Caldwell-Carter wedding." Drew cleared his throat. "All of them?" "Yes." "All right, I'll update the system." "The bride will be notified." I could practically hear him raising an eyebrow. I hung up, pulled in a slow breath, and moved to the photographer, then the DJ, then the bridal spa appointment I'd never been invited to. One by one, the charges that drained my savings disappeared from my responsibility. With every cancellation, the knot of anxiety in my chest loosened another inch. By midday, a strange feeling settled over me. Not guilt, not fear, but liberation. For the first time in years, I wasn't bracing for the next demand. I wasn't worrying about how to stretch my paycheck. I wasn't bending myself backward to make someone else's dream easier. My phone buzzed on the table again. I didn't look immediately. I let it ring twice before turning it over. Mom. "Of course," I answered. "What do you think you're doing?" Mom snapped. No greeting, no pause. "The venue called Hannah in a panic. They said you canceled the payment. Are you trying to humiliate us?" "No," I said calmly. "I'm honoring her wishes." "Don't be smart with me, Lena. Hannah is devastated. She's been in tears all morning. You know how she gets when she's overwhelmed. She said I wasn't invited, and that I wasn't classy enough." "Oh, for heaven's sake," Mom scoffed. "You're still upset about that? It was a joke. You're blowing everything out of proportion." "Mom, she said it in front of her friends. She said it online." "She didn't mean it. And even if she did, does it matter more than your sister's future?" "There it is," I whispered. "What?" Mom demanded. "The part where her life matters more than mine." Mom bristled. "Stop twisting my words. The wedding is important for our family's standing. The Caldwells expect—" "I don't care what the Caldwells expect," I said. "And apparently they don't expect to meet Hannah's embarrassing sister, so this works out for everyone." Mom inhaled sharply. Listen to me. You will pay the balance today. Do you understand? No. For a moment there was silence. Pure, incredulous silence. What did you say? Mom's voice was low, dangerous, the voice she used when I was 8 and dared to push back on something she'd decided. I said no. You're making a fool of yourself, she hissed. This is childish. This is selfish. This is overdue. I heard her breath hitch, just barely. You will ruin this entire wedding. It's not my job to save a wedding I'm excluded from. You're being dramatic, she snapped. No, I said, I'm being done. I hung up before she could respond. The room felt still in a way I almost didn't trust. I leaned back in my chair, closed my eyes, and let the weight of that single syllable settle into my bones. No, I had said it. I had survived it. And nothing collapsed around me. Not the ceiling, not my job, not my world. An email notification pinged on my laptop. I opened it. Dear Lena, this message confirms the cancellation of the premium upgrade you financed. Please direct any future inquiries to the bride or her mother. I laughed softly. Not out of joy, but out of disbelief that I had allowed myself to be trapped in this dynamic for so long. My phone buzzed relentlessly over the next few hours with frantic messages from Hannah, alternating between rage, pleading, threats, and guilt-tripping. I can't believe you do this. You're ruining my life. You owe me. Mom says she's never been more disappointed in you. We need you. Stop being dramatic. Fix this right now. I didn't answer a single one. By evening, the sun dipped low behind the trees outside my window, casting long shadows across my living room. I sat on the couch, legs pulled up under me, watching the light fade. My laptop still sat open on the coffee table, the vendor list glowing like a scoreboard. For the first time in my entire adult life, I had chosen myself over their demands. And the world didn't end. I felt tired, but in a clean, honest way. Like the exhaustion after tearing down something heavy that was never meant to be carried alone. My apartment felt a little bigger. The air felt a little lighter. And somewhere deep inside, beneath the tremors of lingering fear, something steady was forming. Freedom, boundaries, self-respect. 3 things I'd been told I didn't need. 3 things I had just claimed. Tomorrow the real fallout would come. The calls, the screaming, the manipulation, the panic, the scrambling, the spectacle of watching a wedding built on lies collapse without the foundation of my wallet holding it up. But tonight, I finally let myself rest. Because tomorrow, I wouldn't be their safety net anymore. And it was about time they learned how to stand without me. I called the bank the next morning before I even brushed my hair, still half awake, still wrapped in the numb fog of everything that had happened. The representative confirmed what I already feared. Yes, Ms. Carter, there was an attempted transfer of $12,000 from your investment account. It was initiated online with saved credentials. Saved credentials. Credentials Hannah once had access to, because I trusted her. Because I believed helping family meant giving without question. Because I never imagined she would cross a line like this. I didn't authorize it, I said quietly. We've blocked the transaction, the representative assured. But we recommend changing all passwords and enabling higher security. My throat tightened. Thank you. When I hung up, I sat there on the edge of my bed staring at the wall. My heartbeat wasn't frantic. It was steady, cold. The clarity of betrayal did that. It didn't shock me anymore. It just carved something deeper. By mid-morning, I had changed every password, frozen my accounts, and added 2-factor authentication strong enough to keep out anyone except me. And with every step, I felt something unravel. An old version of myself slipping away like shedding a skin I never wanted to grow in the first place. At noon, my phone buzzed. Mom. I ignored it. It buzzed again. Hannah. Ignored. Then a text from the wedding planner. Urgent. Bride attempting to dispute charges we have receipts for under your name. Please confirm cancellation stands. I typed 2 words back. It stands. I put my phone face down and exhaled. My apartment was silent except for the faint hum of the refrigerator. And in that silence, something inside me whispered, "You're finally protecting yourself." A gentle knock on my door pulled me out of my thoughts. A soft, hesitant knock, not Mom's, not Hannah's. I peered through the peephole and exhaled in relief. "Marcus." I opened the door, and he stepped in with 2 coffees and a paper bag that smelled like fresh cinnamon rolls. "You look like you need carbs," he said. "I do," I said. And for the first time that day, I laughed. We settled at my small dining table. He didn't ask anything at first. Marcus never forced pain out of me. He let it rise on its own. After a few minutes of sipping coffee, he finally spoke. "So," he said gently, "what's the damage today?" I told him. "About the attempted transfer. About Mom showing up last night with her twisted justifications. About Hannah's collapse into public panic. About the truth finally clawing its way through every lie they'd built." He listened quietly, jaw tightening with each detail. When I finished, he asked the question I least expected. "How do you feel?" No one had ever asked me that. Not Mom, not Hannah, not anyone in my family. The question cracked something inside me. I stared at the coffee swirling in my cup, unable to meet his eyes. "I feel stupid," I whispered. "Like I let this happen, like I enabled it." He leaned forward instantly. No, don't you dare blame yourself." "It's hard not to," I murmured. "I gave them everything. I said yes to everything. I made it easy for them to treat me this way." "You made it easy to love you," he corrected. "They chose to use you. That's on them." I swallowed hard, blinking rapidly. "Why does that feel even worse?" "Because you're human, Lena," he said softly, "and because betrayal never comes from strangers." The words hit me so deeply I had to look away. We sat in silence for a moment before he reached into the paper bag and slid a cinnamon roll across the table. "Eat," he said. "Emotional conversations require sugar." I smiled weakly and took a bite. When I finally looked up, he was watching me with that steady, protective expression he always had when life fell apart in my hands. "You know," he said, "this is the first time I've seen you draw a line with them." "It feels horrible," I admitted. "It feels horrible because it's new," he said, "not because it's wrong." I opened my mouth to respond, but my phone buzzed again, vibrating aggressively against the table. I sighed and flipped it over. It wasn't Mom. It wasn't Hannah. It wasn't a vendor. It was an unknown number. A moment later, a voicemail notification appeared. My stomach twisted. I put it on speaker and pressed play. "Hi, Lena. This is Evan." Marcus raised a brow. The voice continued. "I don't want to push, but I think we need to talk. I just found out something, and I think you deserve to know before it gets worse." I glanced at Marcus, who mouthed, "What now?" The message wasn't done. "Hannah told my parents you refused to help because you're unstable. She said you've always been jealous of her, and that she caught you trying to sabotage the wedding planner. My parents didn't believe her, but they asked me to get the truth from you directly." My jaw dropped. He added softly, "I'm sorry she dragged you into this again. Call me when you can." The message ended. For a moment, the room was silent. Then Marcus let out the slowest, most controlled exhale I'd ever heard. "She's unraveling," he said, "and she's trying to drag you down with her." I rubbed my forehead. "Of course she is." "Are you going to call him back?" "I don't know," I admitted. Marcus leaned back. "Well, I do. Yes, you're going to call him, because he's one of the few people actually trying to get to the truth." Before I could respond, there was another knock, louder this time. My blood went cold. Marcus's expression hardened. "Stay here." He walked to the door, looked through the peephole, then sighed. "It's your mom." Of course it was. Before I could tell him not to open it, the knocking grew sharper, more frantic. He unlocked it but didn't move aside. Mom stood there, hair frazzled, eyes swollen, breathing hard, not angry, desperate. "Is she here?" she asked, trying to push past him. Marcus blocked the doorway. "Calm down." "Where is she?" Mom snapped. "My daughter is in crisis and she caused it." I stepped into view. "Mom." Her eyes locked onto mine. "You need to fix this." There it was. The same demand, the same expectation, the same dismissal of my pain. "No," I said quietly. She froze. "What?" "No." Her mouth fell open. "Lena, this isn't a game. Hannah, she's not well. She's saying things. She's trying to survive the fallout of her own lies," I said. "And you're trying to make that my responsibility." "That's what family does," Mom shouted. "No," I said again. "That's what you taught me family does. Real family doesn't demand sacrifice. Real family gives too." Mom didn't speak for several seconds. Her breathing grew shallow. She wasn't angry anymore. She was terrified. "Lena," she whispered, "if Hannah loses everything, I don't know what she'll do." I swallowed. "You mean," I corrected softly, "you don't know what you'll do, because your world revolved around her wedding, around impressing the Caldwells, around pretending we were something we couldn't afford to be." Mom's face crumpled, not in shame, in panic. For the first time I saw the truth. She wasn't afraid of losing Hannah. She was afraid of losing the illusion of status she'd clung to for years. "I'm not fixing this," I said gently. "I'm not cleaning up the mess." Mom stared at me, trembling. "Then who will?" Hearing those words, those helpless words, almost broke me. Almost. But I stayed steady. "You," I whispered, "and Hannah. Together. Without me." It was the first time my mother ever looked at me like someone she didn't know, like a stranger, and that alone told me everything about the relationship we'd had all my life. Marcus closed the door softly after she left. He turned to me. "You okay?" I exhaled shakily. "I don't know." But deep inside, beneath the ache and fear and exhaustion, one truth pulsed like a heartbeat. I was free, and freedom, real freedom, was terrifying and beautiful and painful and necessary, even if I had to walk through every shattered piece to reach it. Evan was already seated when I walked into the quiet cafe, hands clasped tightly on the table, eyes fixed on the door as though he'd been waiting for this moment far longer than a single night. He stood when he saw me, polite even in confusion, and offered a small, strained smile. "Lena?" he asked, as if confirming I was real. "Yes." I sat across from him. "I figured you had questions." He exhaled slowly. "More than I know how to ask." For a moment, neither of us spoke. The hum of the espresso machine filled the silence, along with the soft chatter of early customers. Then Evan leaned forward. "I didn't even know you existed." The words weren't accusatory, just stunned. I nodded. "I gathered that." "She told me she was an only child," he said quietly. "For 2 years. That's what I believed." His voice held genuine hurt, and for the first time, I saw him not as Hannah's fiancé, but as another person blindsided by her curated world. "What did she say happened between you?" he asked. "That I cut contact," I answered. "That I wanted nothing to do with her, or the family, none of which is true." Evan rubbed his forehead. "None of this makes sense." I folded my hands together. "Then let me tell you everything. From the beginning." So I did. I told him about supporting Mom and Hannah for years, paying Hannah's tuition, then her rent, then every emergency she and Mom created. I told him about the wedding expenses, the deposits, the upgrades, the florist, the catering, all quietly routed through my accounts. I told him about being excluded from the planning even as the bills kept coming. I told him about the texts, the Instagram comments, the humiliation, the dismissal. Evan didn't interrupt once. When I finished, he leaned back slowly, like he needed physical distance from the truth. His face had gone pale. She told my parents her mother was covering most of the wedding expenses, he said, that they were a traditional family who took pride in contributing. I shook my head. It was me. He stared at the table. She said you didn't come around because you struggled socially, that you didn't like crowds, that you didn't want to participate in high-pressure family events. My jaw tightened. She says I'm awkward a lot, if that helps. Evan looked pained. I thought she was protecting your privacy. I let out a quiet laugh. She was protecting herself from embarrassment. He didn't deny it. He didn't try to soften it. He simply absorbed it. Then he touched the folder I'd placed on the table, printouts of invoices, receipts, bank records. May I? He asked. I nodded. He flipped through each page slowly, eyes widening as the numbers added up. You paid for everything. Not everything, I corrected. Just most things. He swallowed hard. She told me you refused to help, that you were jealous, that you were trying to sabotage the wedding. I stared at him, stunned. Sabotage? Evan closed the folder gently. I don't think I've ever felt this foolish. It wasn't your fault, I said softly. Hannah has always been very good at managing appearances. He nodded, bitter understanding dawning on his face. My parents asked her last night why she hid her family, why she never brought you up. She said you two weren't close, that you caused drama. I looked down. I've never caused drama in my life. I believe that now, he said. A silence settled between us, heavier than before. This isn't just about money, Evan finally said. It's about trust. If she lied about you, what else has she lied about? He wasn't really asking me. He was asking himself. She can be different with people she thinks she needs, I said gently, and cruel to the ones she knows will never leave. His mouth tightened. She lied to me, to my parents, to her friends, to everyone. And herself, I added softly. He sat there for a long moment, staring into the distance. When he finally looked back at me, his expression had changed. Resolved, steadier, hurt, but clear. I think we need to meet again, he said. With my parents there. I hesitated. Are you sure that's a good idea? They deserve to know the truth, he said firmly. And so do I. His sincerity made something loosen inside my chest. Not relief exactly, but the sense that I wasn't crazy. That someone finally believed me without twisting the narrative into something ugly. We stood to leave. Evan paused before walking away. Lena, I'm sorry, he said quietly. Not just for what Hannah did, but for not knowing about you sooner. I didn't know how to respond, so I simply nodded. That night, while I was heating soup on the stove, my phone buzzed. I almost ignored it, but something compelled me to look. Hannah, what did you say to Evan? He's acting weird. His parents are asking questions. Fix this, now. Don't you dare ruin this for me. I set the phone face down on the counter. Not my fire to put out. But then, another notification. From the wedding planner. Urgent. Bride is claiming cancellation was due to jealous behavior from sister. She is attempting to reverse charges. Please advise. I let out a slow breath. Of course she was. Of course she'd rather spin a narrative about my instability than admit she'd betrayed the one person keeping her fantasy afloat. I finished dinner but barely tasted it. My thoughts were already spiraling to what tomorrow would bring. Meeting Evan's parents, explaining the past, exposing years of lies. I wasn't excited or triumphant. I was simply bracing. Because once the truth reached the Caldwells, nothing, absolutely nothing, would ever be the same for Hannah. When the night grew late and the apartment settled into its quiet hum, I stood by the window and whispered to myself, this wasn't the explosion. This was just the spark. A pounding knock rattled my door just as the sun was slipping behind the buildings, turning my apartment gold and quiet. I froze, heart thudding, because I already knew who it was. No one else knocked like that, sharp, impatient, entitled. I opened the door an inch. Mom pushed her way inside without waiting. "What did you tell the Caldwells?" she demanded, breath ragged, hair windblown like she'd rushed straight from the car to my hallway. I shut the door behind her. "Hello to you too." "Don't play games with me, Lena." She spun around, eyes wild. "Evan's parents called. They spent 2 hours interrogating Hannah last night. They're talking about postponing the wedding. Do you have any idea what you've done?" I folded my arms. "I told them the truth." Mom's face tightened. "The truth," she repeated mockingly. "Your version of it." "That I've been paying for a wedding I wasn't invited to?" I asked calmly. "Yes, that version." She scoffed, pacing like a cornered animal. "You know Hannah lashes out when she's overwhelmed. She didn't mean what she posted." "She meant it enough to write it publicly." I walked past her into the living room, giving myself space. "And you meant your emoji." Mom threw her hands up. "It was just an emoji. You're being dramatic, Lena. This is also convenient," I cut in. "The way everything I feel is always dismissed as exaggeration." Her jaw snapped shut. I stared at her. "You two treated me like a problem to contain, like an obstacle, or worse, like a wallet. I'm done pretending I don't see it." "That's not fair," Mom shouted. "Everything I've done has been for this family." "For Hannah," I corrected. "Always for Hannah." Her nostrils flared. "You're jealous." I laughed once, a sharp sound. "Jealous? Of what? Being mocked, manipulated, hidden?" Mom went quiet. Not defeated, but calculating. She always shifted when she realized pure anger wouldn't win. Then she switched tactics, just like she had my whole childhood. Her shoulders slumped, her voice softened, her eyes glistened. "Lena, sweetheart, Hannah's wedding is our one chance. Don't you want our family to have stability? Respect?" I blinked at her. "Respect?" I echoed. "By lying? By pretending I don't exist?" Mom faltered, like the script she always used finally failed her. Before I could say more, my laptop pinged. A new email, from my financial advisor. I opened it, pulse climbing. "Suspicious activity detected on your investment account. Transfer request of $12,000 has been denied pending your confirmation." My stomach dropped. I looked at Mom. Her expression flickered, barely, but enough. "Did you try to access my accounts?" My voice was low, steady, dangerous. She scoffed too quickly. "Don't be ridiculous. I don't even know your passwords." The lie hung in the air between us. Because Hannah did. Hannah had used my card information for years to help speed up the payments. She must have memorized more than I realized. I stepped back. Unbelievable. Mom's face hardened again, relief gone. "If you hadn't cut us off, no one would have needed to take desperate measures." "Desperate measures?" I echoed. "Stealing from me is desperate measures?" She looked away, breath sharp. There were so many things I could have screamed, so many truths that had gone unsaid for decades. But all the fury inside me condensed into one quiet sentence. "You never saw me as part of this family, just as someone who could carry it." Mom flinched, a rare, honest flinch. I moved to the bookshelf, needing something to hold on to, and saw the corner of a folder sticking out of her purse. Maybe it was instinct, maybe it was 20 years of knowing that Mom hid things. Either way, I reached for it before she could stop me. She lunged forward. "Lena, don't—" But it was too late. I slid the papers out and froze. It was a life insurance document. My father's. Dated 18 years ago. Beneficiary, Lena Carter payout. $28,000 dispersed to Miranda Carter. A buzzing sound filled my ears. I didn't know if it was the room or my heartbeat. "You took this," I whispered. "You took money Dad meant for me." Mom's voice rose sharply. "We were drowning after he died. You have no idea what it's like raising 2 kids alone." "You didn't raise 2 kids," I said. "You raised one daughter and used the other." Her lips parted, a small gasp, a blink of panic before anger replaced it again. the frustration of being seen too clearly. "I had to do what was best," she said. "Hannah needed opportunities. She needed support. She needed more than I did," I interrupted. Mom threw her hands out. "You were always fine, independent. I didn't have to worry about you." "That's not love," I said quietly. "That's neglect." Mom's mouth fell open, stunned into silence. It lasted only a breath. Then her face twisted. "Don't talk to me like that. I sacrificed everything for this family." "No," I said. "You sacrificed me." She staggered back as if slapped. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't cry. I didn't beg for her to understand. Something inside me simply settled. "Mom," I said softly, "I owe you nothing. And whatever version of me you think you get to control, that version doesn't exist anymore." Her eyes hardened into something brittle and furious. "You're making a terrible mistake," she said, voice trembling. "You're choosing strangers over your own family." I put the folder back into her hands. "No, I'm choosing myself, for the first time." Mom stared at me, chest rising and falling like she was holding back another scream. But she didn't scream, she didn't plead, she just stood frozen, unable to find a version of the story where she won. She walked to the door, pausing with her hand on the knob. "You'll regret this," she whispered. "I already regret staying silent for so long," I said. She left, slamming the door hard enough to rattle the frame. I sank onto the couch, the folder still warm in my hands. My father's name stared up at me, written in ink that somehow still felt fresh. I pressed the paper to my chest and inhaled shakily. For the first time in months, maybe years, the tears came. Slow, quiet, but real. Not because I felt broken, but because I finally understood how long I'd been holding the pieces together alone. And somewhere in that grief, another truth bloomed. If they could betray me this deeply, maybe it was time I learned who I was without them. The restaurant Evan chose was quiet, elegant, the kind of place with warm lighting and thick tablecloths. Nothing like the spaces where Hannah performed her curated life. I arrived right on time, nerves humming under my skin. But when the hostess led me toward the back of the dining room, I forced my spine straight. I wasn't the one who needed to explain myself tonight. Evan stood as soon as he saw me. His parents, Margaret and Charles Caldwell, sat on either side of him, both composed, both watching me with the kind of polite interest reserved for unexpected guests in their carefully arranged world. "Lena," Evan said softly, "thank you for coming." "Of course," I replied, though I wasn't sure it was true. I took my seat. A waiter came by, poured water, disappeared. Silence settled like dust. Finally, Margaret leaned forward, her eyes sharp in a way that didn't feel unkind, just observant. "We appreciate you making the time," she said. "We've learned quite a few things this week that we hadn't anticipated." I folded my hands on the table, bracing myself. "I understand." Charles cleared his throat. "We'll be direct. Hannah told us she was an only child, that you'd cut ties with the family years ago due to conflict." I exhaled slowly. "That isn't true." "So we gathered," Margaret murmured. Evan lifted a folder, the one I'd brought him yesterday, and placed it gently in the center of the table. "My parents looked through everything," he said quietly. "The invoices, the bank records, the email chains." Charles nodded. "We had no idea you were financially responsible for nearly the entire wedding." "Or your sister's education," Margaret added, "or the mortgage payoff." Their tone wasn't judgmental. If anything, they sounded confused in a way that made my throat tighten unexpectedly. Confused because generosity like mine didn't align with the story they'd been told. I kept my voice steady. "I supported my family for years. Sometimes because they needed it, sometimes because they expected it, and sometimes because, well, that's the dynamic they raised me into." Margaret exchanged a glance with her husband. Charles cleared his throat. "We're trying to understand why Hannah would hide that." The question wasn't simple, but the answer was. She was embarrassed, I said quietly. Not of what I did, but of who I am. I don't fit the image she wanted to project. Evan winced visibly. Margaret frowned. I saw the comments on Instagram. A pause. They were unkind. Unkind was such an elegant, gentle word for it. Still, I nodded. And I saw your mother's responses as well, she continued. The laughing emoji. The dismissive tone. The calm in her voice made the humiliation feel sharper. I looked down at my water glass. I don't think my mother ever intended for me to have a place in that wedding. Or in that world, Evan added quietly. No one spoke for a moment. The waiter approached, but we waved him off. I didn't know what they wanted from me. Explanation, apology, justification, reassurance. I just knew I didn't want to keep carrying the weight of every lie Hannah had told, so I told the truth. My dad died when we were kids, I said. After that, Mom struggled. She leaned on me a lot, even when I was still in high school. And with Hannah, well, she was the golden child, pretty, social. Everything Mom wanted to present to the world. I was the steady one, the one who could handle things. So, I handled everything. I shrugged lightly. I guess Hannah figured if I could handle everything, I could handle being invisible too. The words felt too honest, too raw, but they were real. Charles sighed slowly. I'm sorry, he said, surprising me. Family shouldn't be built like that. For a moment, I didn't know how to respond. Then Margaret leaned in again. We don't care about prestige or appearances, Lena. We care about honesty, and what we've discovered this week has shaken our trust. I nodded, though the knot in my stomach tightened. I'm sorry you were dragged into this. You have nothing to be sorry for, Evan said firmly. I looked at him, meeting his eyes for the first time since sitting down. He looked deeply conflicted. Hurt, disappointed, angry in a way that wasn't loud but hollow. A fracture widening behind his ribs. He took a breath. I don't know what happens next. I don't know what this means for our engagement. But I do know that I can't move forward without understanding the truth. And you've been the only one willing to tell it. I swallowed hard. I hadn't expected that to affect me, but it did. Margaret nodded thoughtfully. If your sister had simply said she was embarrassed about her upbringing or about money, we might have understood. But to erase family? To lie so effortlessly? She shook her head. It reflects deeper issues. Charles looked at Evan. Son, you know how we feel about integrity. Evan nodded. I do. The room grew still, heavy with decisions none of us could make for him. He turned to me again. Lena, is there anything else we should know? Anything Hannah might try to spin? I hesitated. Mom's attempt to access my investments, the hidden insurance payout, the years of manipulation. But some truths weren't mine to hand them. Not yet. Not like this. I chose the gentlest version of the truth. Just be prepared for Hannah to defend herself by attacking me. It's her default. But every document I gave you is factual. Every payment is traceable. Every exclusion is documented. Evan nodded slowly. Thank you. The conversation softened after that. We talked about my job, my apartment, my father. Things that felt strangely personal to share with people I hardly knew, yet somehow safer than sharing them with my own family. At the end of the meal, Margaret placed her hand on mine, warm, firm, kind. For what it's worth, she said softly, you seem like someone any family should be proud of. The compliment hit a tender part of me I didn't know was exposed. I managed a quiet, thank you. Outside the air was crisp, the sky brushing into evening blues and purples. Evan walked me to my car. I'm sorry again, he said, for all of it. You don't have to apologize for her choices, I replied. He looked down at the pavement. I feel like I've been living beside a stranger. I didn't have anything comforting to offer, so I simply said, truth always comes out. It's painful, but freeing. He nodded, though there was pain in his eyes. Take care tonight, Lena. You too. As I drove home, the reality of the evening settled over me like a weighted blanket. I had spoken my truth, they had listened, and tomorrow things would break open even further. When I stepped into my apartment, the quiet met me like an old friend. I kicked off my shoes, sat on the couch, and let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. My phone buzzed. Hannah. Where were you tonight? Answer me. Why did Evan's parents say they met you? What did you say? You are ruining my life. If my engagement ends because of you, I'll never forgive you. I didn't respond. Instead, I turned off my phone. Then I leaned back, closed my eyes, and let a single startling truth settle into place. For the first time in my entire life, I wasn't the one trying to fix what someone else broke. And I wasn't responsible for putting Hannah's world back together. She'd have to face the truth herself, whether she forgave me or not. That morning, the first sign something had shifted came from the silence. For weeks, my phone had been a nonstop storm. Calls, texts, missed calls, voicemails, accusations, guilt trips, demands. But when sunlight crept across my bedroom wall, my phone didn't vibrate, didn't blink, didn't scream for attention. It simply lay there, quiet. I almost didn't want to touch it, afraid the peace might dissolve the second I looked. But habit won. I reached for it, unlocked the screen, and stared. 32 missed calls from Hannah, 6 from Mom, 12 from an unknown number that I suspected, correctly, was the wedding planner. But no new messages this morning, not yet. The storm had paused. The eye was here. I slipped the phone into my pocket and got ready for work. My reflection in the mirror surprised me, not because I looked different, but because I looked like myself, someone I hadn't seen in years, someone whose shoulders sat a little higher, someone who no longer flinched at her own name. By the time I reached the office, the quiet had followed me like a thin veil, light, fragile, but present. I settled into my desk, hoping for one normal day. Just one. But fate, or whatever cosmic force enjoyed irony, had other plans. My direct line rang. The receptionist's voice whispered through the receiver. Lena, I think you need to come to the lobby. Why? She exhaled in that way people do when they hope you won't blame them. Your mother is here, and your sister. My stomach sank. Of course. The storm hadn't paused. It had gathered. I took the elevator down slowly, giving myself time to brace. But nothing could have prepared me for what I saw when the doors opened. Hannah sat in the lobby chair, sunglasses on indoors, shoulders shaking. Not delicately, not gracefully. She was sobbing with the intensity of someone whose world had cracked, and she had no idea how to pick up the pieces. Mom stood beside her, stiff-backed and fuming, like she could hold Hannah together by sheer willpower. The moment they saw me, Hannah tore off her sunglasses. Her eyes were swollen, her mascara streaked. How could you? She choked. I walked past her and sat in the chair opposite them, calm as I could manage. What happened? She stared at me like I'd stabbed her. Evan ended the engagement. The words hit the room like shattered glass. Even the receptionist flinched. I inhaled deeply. I'm sorry, Hannah. No, you're not, she snapped, voice cracking. You did this. You ruined everything. I didn't respond immediately, letting her cry, letting Mom glare daggers into my skull. Finally, Hannah spoke through gasps. He said he can't trust me. She wiped her face, smearing makeup further. He said he doesn't care about money. He cares that I lied. About you, about Mom, about everything. I nodded slowly. That's fair. She stared at me in disbelief. Fair? Fair? Lena, he left me. He said he needs time apart to think about whether he even knows who I am. That sounds honest, I said quietly. Hannah slapped the arm of her chair in frustration. Stop talking like that. Mom stepped forward. This is your fault, Lena. All of it. If you hadn't inserted yourself... I didn't insert myself, I cut in softly. I told the truth when I was asked. You could have protected her, Mom spat. I tilted my head. She didn't protect me. A flicker of guilt crossed Hannah's face, but it vanished quickly under resentment. You didn't have to tell them everything, she whispered. I kept my voice steady. What did you want me to do? Lie for you? Hide for you? Pretend I didn't exist? Yes, Hannah shouted. Yes, it was working. Everything was finally working. Evan's parents liked me. I was part of their world. I was moving up. And you destroyed it. I leaned forward, elbows on my knees, looking at her long enough for her to actually meet my gaze. Hannah, I said softly, you destroyed it the moment you built it on lies. Her breath caught. For a second, her face crumpled, not in anger, but in something like recognition. But it was gone just as quickly. Mom stepped between us, as though shielding her favorite child from the truth. Your sister's world is collapsing, and you sit here, acting superior. We are your family. You owe us compassion. You owe us support. I owe nothing, I said, still calm, still quiet. Not anymore. Mom blinked, stunned, like the words were foreign. Hannah stood abruptly, her chair screeching across the lobby floor. Come on, Mom. She doesn't care. She never cared. I frowned. That's not true. I cared so much that it broke me. She scoffed through fresh tears. Look at you. Acting like some innocent victim. Like you didn't want this. Like you didn't enjoy watching me fall apart. My chest ached. Not from guilt, but from the realization that Hannah genuinely couldn't imagine love that wasn't servitude. I didn't enjoy this, I whispered. But I won't carry it for you either. She laughed bitterly. You sound just like Evan. Maybe you two should date. Mom gasped. I simply blinked. Hannah grabbed her purse. You're cold. You're heartless. I met her gaze. No, Hannah, I'm tired. She stared at me, breathing hard. Something inside her wavered, anger fighting grief, resentment fighting shame. Then she shook her head and stormed toward the door. Mom followed, but not before turning back, eyes sharp. You will regret this, she said again, the same words she'd used before. But this time, they sounded like a curse whispered out of fear, not rage. When the door closed behind them, the lobby fell into silence. I sat still for a long moment, letting the weight of what had just happened settle around me. My chest felt heavy, but not in the suffocating way it once did. When I finally returned upstairs, my coworkers glanced at me, sensing the tension radiating like heat. I offered a stiff smile, sat at my desk, and stared at my screen without seeing anything. My world hadn't collapsed, but Hannah's had, and Mom's had, and part of me wondered if, by tearing away the safety net, I had pushed them into a spiral they weren't ready to face alone. But another part of me, the part that had been buried under obligation for years, knew the truth. If their world could crumble this easily, it was never my job to keep it standing. That evening, as the sky turned dusky lavender again, my phone buzzed one last time. A message from Evan. Just wanted you to know. None of this is your fault. Thank you for being honest. I hope you're doing okay. I set the phone down, closed my eyes, and let the quiet fill me. For the second time in weeks, I realized something almost terrifyingly simple. My life no longer revolved around cleaning up other people's chaos. And in the empty, peaceful stillness of my apartment, I felt something like hope take root in the space where guilt used to live. I didn't realize how exhausted I'd become until Saturday morning arrived, and I woke to sunlight instead of a vibrating phone. For the first time in months, no one was demanding anything from me. No bills, no crises, no guilt-laden requests disguised as family emergencies. Just quiet. I made coffee slowly, savoring every step, the grinding, the pouring, the steam curling over the rim of the mug. My apartment felt different now, lighter, like the air itself was adjusting to my new boundaries. Still, the peace felt fragile, like if I breathed too deeply, I might shatter it. I spent the morning cleaning my tiny balcony, sweeping away dead leaves and old dust. I repotted a plant I had neglected for months, a spindly pothos that somehow survived despite receiving the same half attention I used to give myself. The symbolism wasn't lost on me. Just as I finished watering it, my phone buzzed. Marcus. The one friend who always knew how to read my silences before I understood them myself. "Open your door," he texted. I blinked, confused, but did as he asked. When I cracked the door open, Marcus stood there holding a grocery bag in one hand and a stack of board games in the other. He grinned. "I figured you could use a distraction." A small, unexpected laugh escaped me. "You brought Monopoly? That's cruel." "And ice cream," he added, lifting the grocery bag. "Cruelty balanced with kindness." He stepped inside without waiting and immediately surveyed the apartment with approving eyes. "It feels different in here," he said. "Different how?" "Like you finally exhaled." I shrugged lightly. Maybe I did. He unpacked the groceries like he'd done it 100 times, because he had. We cooked an easy lunch, ate on the couch, and let a movie play in the background. He didn't push, didn't pry, just sat beside me until my shoulders relaxed and my breath deepened. When the movie ended, he paused the screen and turned toward me. "You look lighter," he said. "I feel something," I admitted. "Not happy, not sad, just new." He nodded knowingly. "That's what happens when you finally drop a weight you weren't meant to carry." The words hit me harder than I expected. I swallowed, feeling emotion rise in my throat. Then Marcus did what he always did. Redirected before I drowned. "So," he said, leaning back, "you ready to tell me how it actually went? With Evan and his parents?" I exhaled. It was surreal. They were kind, confused, disappointed in her, angry at the lies, but not angry at me. "Good," he said firmly. "They shouldn't be." "And Evan—" I hesitated. He looked shattered. Marcus nodded slowly. "He loved her." "I think so. That's what makes betrayal hurt," he said. "Love doesn't protect us from pain. It multiplies it." A quiet settled between us, a thoughtful one. Marcus knew more about heartbreak than I ever let myself imagine. After a while, he nudged my shoulder gently. "Hey." "Yeah?" "You're doing the right thing," he said quietly, "even if it doesn't feel good yet." "It doesn't," I admitted. "It feels like burning down a house I lived in my whole life." He nodded. "Sometimes the house is full of mold you can't breathe in anymore." I rubbed my eyes. "Why does it still hurt?" "Because you expected more," he said. "And you deserved more." My chest tightened. I keep thinking about Dad, what he'd say right now, if he'd be disappointed in me. Marcus shook his head immediately. "No, absolutely not. Your dad would have been proud. He'd be furious at how you were treated. And he'd want you to stop setting yourself on fire to keep everyone else warm." The tears hit before I could stop them. Not sobs, just quiet, steady tears that burned on their way down. Marcus didn't flinch. He handed me a tissue and waited. After a moment, I whispered, "I miss him." "I know," he said. "I didn't realize how empty things felt without someone who actually loved me for me." Marcus's expression softened. "You're building that now. Real love. From friends, from new family, from people who actually see you. You're rebuilding what you lost." His words wrapped around something bruised in me, something deep and neglected. The rest of the afternoon passed in silence and small comfort. We played a round of Monopoly that nearly ended our friendship. Marcus cheated, I swear. Then settled on his favorite crime documentary until the sun dipped low. When he finally grabbed his jacket to leave, he paused at the door. "One more thing," he said. "Don't isolate yourself just because you're hurting. Call me, or Sarah, or anyone who makes you feel like you're allowed to take up space." "I will," I said quietly. "Promise?" "I promise." After he left, the apartment felt different again, Not heavy, not lonely. Just still. A good kind of still. I grabbed a blanket, curled up on the couch, and let myself breathe. Then my phone buzzed. Not Hannah, not Mom, Sarah. The woman from my office who had quietly become one of the kindest, steady points in my life. Her text was simple. Checking in. How are you holding up today? I read it twice, 3 times. Then typed back, better than yesterday. She responded almost immediately. Good, you deserve better days. My chest warmed. We texted for an hour about movies, stress baking, her dog's habit of chewing through socks. Nothing heavy, nothing dramatic, just human connection, real connection. And somewhere in that small, gentle conversation, something inside me shifted again. A seed of possibility, a hint of hope, a sense that maybe life could be soft again. Later that night, before bed, I opened my journal, something I hadn't touched in years, and wrote a single sentence on a blank page. For the first time in my adult life, I'm learning what peace feels like. Then I closed it gently, and for the first night in months, I slept without waking once, without fear, without guilt, without waiting for the next crisis to fall into my lap. Chapter 11 wasn't about confronting my family. It was about confronting myself, and realizing I was finally becoming someone I wanted to know. The trees outside my window had begun turning to amber and rust, their leaves fluttering across the sidewalk like quiet reminders that seasons change, whether we're ready or not. I stood at the stove stirring cranberry sauce, something I'd never made from scratch before, when the realization hit me. This was the first holiday I had ever planned for myself. Not for Mom, not for Hannah. Not because I was expected to, because I wanted to. Thanksgiving at my place. How strange. How impossible it would have sounded a year ago. And yet here I was, calm, steady, barefoot in my own kitchen, watching steam curl above a pot that smelled like cinnamon and new beginnings. Sarah arrived first, carrying a beautifully uneven homemade pie and smiling like she'd brought the sun with her. I wasn't sure if it would set, she said, laughing as she handed it to me. But I figured even if it collapses, it's still edible. I touched her hand softly, lingering 1 second longer than necessary. It's perfect. She didn't pull away. Then the doorbell rang again, Marcus and his wife, bringing laughter, wine, and a board game. He swore we wouldn't fight over this time. My cousins trickled in next, arms full of food and easy warmth. My Uncle Robert brought old photos again, determined to help me rebuild the parts of childhood I'd only half remembered. And finally, just as I was lighting candles on the dining table, a hesitant knock. Hannah stood in the doorway. No dramatic makeup, no expensive coat, just a simple sweater, red eyes, and a tentative smile that looked painfully unfamiliar on her face. "Hi," she whispered. I nodded softly. "Hi." She stepped inside like she wasn't sure she was allowed to. She held a dish with both hands, a lopsided pan of cornbread. "I made this," she said. "It's the only recipe I didn't mess up." I smiled. "It smells great." She exhaled with visible relief. For the first time in years, she didn't act like a princess entering her kingdom. She walked in like a person entering a space she hoped she could earn a place in. Mom arrived last, lingering on the threshold even longer than Hannah. Her hands clutched a dish wrapped in foil, a sweet potato casserole, my dad's favorite. When she finally met my eyes, hers weren't sharp or demanding. They were tired, and something else. Something like humility, or fear, or the beginning of understanding. "Thank you for inviting me," she said quietly. I nodded. "Thank you for coming." She stepped inside. It was awkward at first, a dozen small silences, a dozen careful words. But the room gradually softened, friends mixing with family, new laughter replacing old tensions. Sarah chatted with my cousins while Marcus poured wine for everyone who wasn't driving home. My uncle told a story about my dad that made me smile in ways I hadn't since childhood. And slowly, almost cautiously, Mom and Hannah drifted closer. To me, to each other, to the table where something like reconciliation simmered alongside the food. When we finally sat down, 12 people around a table meant for 8. I looked at the mismatched chairs, the slightly uneven plates, the candle that kept flickering like it was laughing at us. And I felt something warm bloom deep inside my chest. This wasn't perfection. It wasn't a curated social stage. It wasn't a family polished for public approval. It was real, messy, human. Mine. I raised my glass. "I'm grateful," I began, my voice steadier than it had any right to be, "for everyone here. This year hasn't been easy. It's been painful and confusing and messy, but it taught me something I never expected to learn." All eyes were on me, even Mom's, even Hannah's. It taught me the difference between obligation and connection, the difference between being needed and being valued, and it taught me that family isn't the people who demand from you, it's the people who grow with you. The room was silent in the softest, most respectful way. I swallowed, emotion thick in my throat. Thank you all for being here, for choosing to be here, for helping me start something new. "To new beginnings," Uncle Robert said, lifting his glass. We clinked, we ate, we laughed, we slipped, we apologized, we navigated. Little by little, the edges softened. Later, as the night wound down, Hannah drifted toward me near the window. The city lights reflected in her eyes, making her look younger than I remembered. "I need to say something," she whispered. I waited. "I'm sorry, Lena. For the wedding, for the lies, for everything." Her voice cracked. "I didn't realize how much I hurt you because I never looked at you. Not really. I only looked at what you could do for me." I felt that land in my chest, heavy, raw, but true. "I'm trying to change," she continued. "I'm seeing someone, a therapist. She's making me face things I don't want to face, things about myself, about Mom, about us." I nodded gently. "That's good, Hannah." She wiped her eyes. "I miss you. I want us to have something real, someday." A softness touched me then. Not forgiveness, not yet, but the possibility of it. "We can start slow," I said. Her relief was palpable. Mom approached next, hesitant, almost frightened. "Lena," she began, "I know I've made mistakes." I looked at her, letting her speak. "I favored Hannah. I leaned on you too much. I know that now. I didn't see you were hurting because I didn't want to look. And I'm sorry." It wasn't much, but it was more than she had ever offered. "We'll figure it out," I said quietly. She nodded, eyes glassy. When everyone left, casserole dishes empty, candles burned low, laughter still echoing faintly, I stood alone in my apartment, surrounded by the remnants of a holiday that felt like a new chapter rather than a painful reminder. I cleaned slowly, letting the peace settle. Then Sarah tapped lightly on the doorframe, having stayed behind to help. I turned toward her. She smiled in that gentle, honest way that never demanded anything from me. "Proud of you," she said. I stepped closer, letting myself lean into her warmth for a moment. "Thank you." When she left, I finally sat down with a cup of tea, wrapping my hands around the warmth. My story hadn't wrapped itself in a bow. Not every fracture was healed. Not every wound was closed. But for the first time in my entire life, I was living a life that belonged to me, not a life built from obligation, but from choice. And that, I realized, was worth more than any wedding, any approval, any imagined classiness. If you've made it this far with me, thank you. And if you've ever had to walk away from family expectations to protect your own well-being, I'd love to hear your story too. Please like, comment, and subscribe if this journey resonated with you. Your support helps me continue sharing stories that remind us we're not alone, and that we all deserve a life built on respect, truth, and real connection. Here's to new beginnings, and to choosing yourself.